Morning.
Hi there, good morning. Have you got the audio and video?
I've got the audio. I don't have the video.
Okay, let me see. Should be there
Hi.
now.
Good to see you now. Good to
Oh,
see you.
hi.
Thank you very much for agreeing to do this.
That's all right.
Um, it's really interesting. I saw in one of your interviews you mentioned that you started studying drums at a time when the British educational system didn't really think of pop music as being a genre to be taught in schools. And it made me think of Romania right now because I'm doing a PhD in progressive rock drumming and of the 70s. And I remember that I've only realized that until recently, the Romanian educational system didn't really think of pop music and rock music as being genres to be taught. So you ended up studying classical percussion and then
Yes.
jazz. So I was wondering, how did those techniques translate into your approach to pop and rock drumming later on?
Um, then, well, only in basic technique, and obviously I had to learn how to read music and things like that. So when I started, the first like 4 years I was doing drums and percussion. I was playing in orchestras and I played in the National Youth Orchestra, and so it was quite demanding contemporary music, different time signatures, and quite complicated patterns. So that was the academic side. But on the other side, I had a much older brother who was bringing records home, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and things like that. So when I was at home, I cobbled together a really basic drum kit, and every night after school, I just used to play along to records for 2 hours. And so that was really all it was. And uh, when I was about 15 or so, I thought I'd really like to do music as a career. And obviously, rock and pop music, this was the mid 70s. Obviously, rock and pop music was absolutely massive in the UK.
Yeah.
And I'd been to some concerts which I was really excited about. You know, the volume. I'd never been to a rock concert before, and the first time I went, just the volume of the PA kind of blew me away. It was quite exciting, the lights and everything. It was quite exciting. And so I looked at the orchestral scene and I thought there's only like maybe at the time there were more orchestras. There was only like 4 or 5 orchestras in the UK and they had 2 or 3 percussionists. And I thought the chances of me having a career in music when you virtually had to wait for someone to die or retire before you could get into the orchestra. These guys, they were like 60, 70 years old, some of these players, and they were still going strong. So I thought, I've got a better chance of making a career in music if I do drum kit. And like you've picked up from my previous interviews, there wasn't anywhere you could really go. And the school that I was at was just into sports. I didn't really do much music at school, so I was desperate to leave school and do more music. And so I found this college called Leeds College of Music, which was doing like a jazz, sort of classical jazz type course where you could play drum kit, but they also had an orchestra as well. So I auditioned for that college and I got a role in that college. So I went to college when I was 16. And by the time I left college, like 4 years later, the whole scene had moved on and rock and pop music was much more popular. You had people like Andrew Lloyd Webber doing rock
Yeah.
operas like Jesus Christ Superstar and Joseph. And so it was much more acceptable. But the people who were running schools and colleges and the education system were all like, 50, 60 years old, and they just thought classical music was the higher art form. And they 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 conceded in a way in accepting that jazz was almost equal to classical. So when I went to college, I had to study jazz, and still rock and roll was still thought of as being the devil's music kind of thing. And the college lecturers used to look down on me because I wanted to play rock music at the
Mhm.
time.
But did your ability to read music help you later on? Did when you played, for example, with Dire Straits or Paul McCartney, did they ever show you drum sheet, or you just picked it up by ear?
Mostly by ear. The first thing I did with Paul McCartney actually involved chart. a
Yeah.
music sheet. He was doing a film soundtrack with George Martin, and I was just doing a few TV shows with him. I wasn't really in the band or anything. And I got a phone call from his manager saying, could you come down to the studio? We're doing some recording tomorrow, kind of thing. So I went down there, and this guy handed me a chart, and it was like a film soundtrack thing. It wasn't rock at all. It was like a brass, it was like a march. It was like a brass band type thing. There were all these brass players there, and George Martin was there. And so, yes, I mean, if I hadn't been able to do that, I would have had to turn that gig down, and that led to me being in Paul's band. But before that, 10 years before that, I was doing a lot of studio work, and it was so much. It was time is money, and so to be able to hear a song one time through, write out what the drums should do, and then play it almost perfectly the first time through, that's how you got studio work. So I found that if you were trying to remember how long the guitar solo was, how the song ended, it was really hard. Whereas if I wrote it all down, I could just concentrate on playing the drums really great, and I had these notes off to one side. So every recording session that I did from about 1980 to 1990, I wrote the drum part out, not note for note, but I would just like 8 bars verse, 8 bars chorus, and I might write in what the drum groove was. And so that really helped me get studio work, which in turn led to me being on the radar of people like Paul McCartney and Dire Straits, the fact that I was playing on records rather than just being in a band. But most of the time, I mean, apart from that one time, that one early session with Paul McCartney, I've never been handed any sheet music on anything. It's always by ear, but I always write out my own sheet music because it's just quicker that way. I'm not wasting people's time trying to remember the song.
Right. And speaking of Paul McCartney, I have to bring into discussion his first world tour, which you were a part of. And I was listening to Tripping the Life Fantastic yesterday, and I think, I think you had in a way to respect or to honor Ringo's legacy because his drum fills are integral parts of songs, and people are air drumming and they know everything. But then you also added your own touch. I think it was "Can't Buy Me Love," and you played this triplet drum fill, da 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 da. And I remember, well, this is something that maybe Ringo would not have done, in the '60s, but it sounded very good in the '90s. So how did you find that balance between, bringing your own style and then also honoring Ringo's original drum parts?
I guess it was just, it felt like it needed that drum fill at that moment in the song. Most of the time when, um, the first thing I did was the Flowers in the Dirt album, and then I was just playing contemporary music and I was just being myself, and it didn't really bother me whether I was trying to be like somebody else. But I was obviously a big fan of Ringo and Joe English, the early Wings drummer. And so when the tour idea came up and Paul said, we really want to play some of these Beatles songs, I didn't feel it was right to just do my own thing. Like you say, people remember the drum parts and everything. And Ringo's got he's got these very strange drum fills because he's a left-handed drummer playing a right-handed drum kit.
Yeah.
And he also came from that blues and jazz tradition where he played straight rock music. He played it with a slight swing. So I tried to do that all the time. And so I really tried to play some of his key signature bits, but you're playing a whole world tour in front of a lot of people, so you have to, if the song needs kicking up, I had to kick it up. But I still felt that was in keeping with the style of the music, that drum fill. But
And
interestingly, I just want to say that, well, in the early 80s, I had no money and I wasn't really playing with a band. And I had this friend who was busking on the street, and he said, "Why don't you come out with a snare drum and busk with me? We can make some money." And so his thing on the street was playing 1950s rock and roll, because he was making, people were donating putting lots of tips in his jar for playing that kind of music. So I played all this Chuck Berry stuff and Little Richard stuff in 1980. And then I got this phone call in 1987. Would you go to this warehouse and do a jam session with Paul McCartney? And so for like 10 years, I'd just been playing contemporary music, like modern contemporary music. And I went to this warehouse and set up the drums, and Paul walked in, and he just wanted to play 50s rock and roll. And so I think in a way that I traveled along the route to being in his band because I could play, I knew the songs and I could play in that style. And so I always say to young drummers, don't just get locked into one genre of music. Try and listen to other genres of music and understand them, because you never know when it's going to come in handy. I mean, if you auditioned for Paul McCartney in 1987, 1988, you never would dream that the audition would be like 50s rock and roll. You'd think you'd be playing his current hits and maybe a bit of Wings or something like that. In
Mhm.
fact, that was more or less that tour was more or less the first time he'd really played many of the Beatles
Yeah.
songs.
Mhm.
He'd always just played his contemporary music. So, yeah.
But that was your first world tour as a drummer, right?
Well, yeah, world tour. I'd done lots of touring. I'd played in Japan. I'd played across Europe. I'd done America a lot of times. So that was my first major stadium tour.
Yeah.
I'd often done clubs and theaters, and with the Waterboys, I supported U2 in America, across America, and then with Julian Cope, we supported Susie and the Banshees across America, and I'd done quite a lot of touring, but it was always like in a small van playing clubs and theaters. So this was the first time I'd been on a massive stage with a big road crew and yeah, playing big stadiums.
Did you feel that you were under a lot of pressure doing that tour, or did you think that the whole band being, the first tour that Paul did under his own name, did you feel pressure building up, or was it?
It was really, but I'd been working with him for over 2 years at that point, and he was very sharing. He wanted everybody in the band to feel like they were part of the show. And so he didn't put me under pressure. I mean, I guess I felt under pressure. I mean, when we played in Los Angeles, Jack Nicholson was there, Stevie Wonder was there, Michael Jackson was there. It was all quite crazy, really. So, and when you play in the UK, it's your home concert and all your friends are coming and everything. So I guess you just have to put it out of your mind, otherwise you wouldn't be able to play. But I mean, we rehearsed we started running the songs in the spring of 1989, and the first show wasn't till September 1989, and we did a few club shows, and we did like a warm-up arena show in the James Bond soundstage in London. And so, we knew what we were doing by the time we started the tour, and I just felt like Paul trusted me to be part of the show, so I guess I didn't feel under pressure. But yeah, I mean, at certain stages during the tour, I mean, when we transitioned from the arenas to the open air stadiums, like the Olympic stadiums and all that kind of thing, then you look out into the crowd and you think, oh my God, I can't believe I'm part of this. So, but you can't be too nervous or else you wouldn't be able to play the show. So you just have to feel confident and think, I'm here for a reason, and the band wants me to be here. And so, I'm just going to do my best.
You document a lot of stuff. I checked your Instagram page, and you always post photos that you took during your world tours. Is photography something that you're passionate about, or do you always wanted to immortalize your travels? Because you have a lot more backstage photos than most musicians that I've spoken to.
It's a funny story. Well, I never really thought of photography, and I'm really frustrated because I did some amazing things like in 1979, I was in New York City right at the end of punk, and I played all the famous punk places, CBGB and Max's Kansas City and everything. And there were a lot of the punks still around, the Ramones and all that. And if I'd had a camera, I would have had amazing photographs. And then in the early 80s, I was involved in the music scene in London through all the rave scene, all the new romantic people. And I would have had amazing photographs of the early 80s if I'd had a camera, but it just didn't cross my mind. And it was just a weird thing I did, and also the whole studio time. Well, obviously Linda had a camera the whole time, so I used to chat with her. Linda was great. I used to chat with her, and I never thought of photography at all. And when we did some UK shows, this British photographer came to the shows and was taking photos of the band, and he had this weird looking amateur camera. And I said to him, because I was used to these big SLR cameras, electronic cameras and everything. And I said to him, what's that camera? And he said, oh, it's a Leica M6. And I'd never heard of it. And that's interesting. Anyway, he took some photos of me and gave me a couple of photos, and I thought, oh, they're amazing. I love these photos. And then I never thought any more about it. And then we went to America in the winter. This was about 4 months into the tour. And Paul asked this American photographer called Bill Bernstein to take photos backstage and at the gigs. And he had the same camera. And I said, oh, what is this camera? And he said, oh, it's a Leica M6. It's amazing. It's mostly used by journalists, war reporting and things like that. But it's great for this backstage stuff. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And Bill said to me, what are you doing every day? And I said, well, I just sit in my room in the hotel. Then I come to the sound check. I do the sound check. And then I just sit backstage for 2 hours, and then we go on and do the show. Then we go back to the hotel. And he said, yeah, you should get a camera and start taking photographs. These are like cherished moments that you'll want to remember. And it never occurred to me. It honestly never occurred to me. And he said, I can get you one of these cameras. When I go back to New York, I'll get one of these cameras for you and teach you how to use it. And you've got to document everything. So it was really down to him. And so he came about 2 weeks later, he gave me this camera, this Leica M6. Well, I paid for it, but he found one for me. And he showed me how to use it. I'd never used a camera really. And he was backstage as well. Take a photo of that. I'll try take a photo of that. So I really got into it. And then he was processing the film for me and coming back the next day and showing me what I'd done, which was instant feedback. And so I luckily I took a couple of great shots the first few weeks that I had the camera, and that gave me the impetus to get more serious about it. And then I just thought, he's right, I don't need to be just sitting in a hotel room. I could be walking around whatever city we're in. Well, I need to remember these moments backstage when we're sound checking and all these pictures of Paul and Linda and things like that. So I really got into it on that tour. And then when it came to the Dire Straits tour, I just took my camera and I had the same attitude. I need to document this. There weren't any photographers on the Dire Straits tour. Like on the McCartney tour, we had a photographer at every show taking photos backstage. So there were no photographers on the Dire Straits tour. I was the only person taking photos. So yeah, I've got boxes and boxes of negatives from all these tours and everything. And also I put on Instagram, I put my memorabilia. I just, if somebody gives me a backstage pass or a tour booklet or a poster or something, I just usually keep it. I don't put it in the bin. So I've got boxes of stage clothes, backstage passes, memorabilia from these tours. So I sometimes put pictures of those on my Instagram.
It's really interesting because I remember about 20 years ago when my parents came home with the first DVD player that they ever bought, and they also bought a bootlegged DVD copy of On the Night, and it started
Yeah.
with it started with calling Elvis. And at the time, I'd been studying drums for 2 or 3 years maybe, and they had great shots of you in the red shirt. Do you still have the red shirt? I remember the red shirt. And I thought, I mean, you were one of the first drummers that I kind of became aware of. Like, okay, this guy that plays with Dire Straits. So it's great that I'm talking to you now. And do you remember, like, you also on your Instagram page, you mentioned that tour was very successful in Europe, but then it wasn't that successful in the US. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. Why do you think that was, and how did that feel for you and the band?
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, probably the most successful, well, apart from, the early albums, Sultans of Swing and that, the high point for Dire Straits was the Brothers in Arms album
Yeah.
and Money for Nothing and things like that. And it was absolutely massive in America. It was massive in Australia. It was big in Europe and everything. And so they started this tour when the album first came out in 1984, 85. And as the tour went on, the band got bigger and bigger. They were playing bigger and bigger stadiums. The album was selling like hotcakes and everything. And they finished the tour in Australia in 1985. They did like 12 shows in a row in this big arena in Sydney. It was a huge success. And then they kind of went away from the band. Like Mark started doing different songs, and he did the Notting Hill Bullies, and he did some film soundtracks and things. And so it was like a 6-year gap before they did the On Every Street album. And I think everything had just changed. You know, in America, you'd had the grunge thing and Nirvana and things like that, and hip hop was massive. And I think just everything had changed. And when we went to Australia, they were just getting into a recession, and I don't think people had the money to go to see the shows. So they because they were so massive at the end of the previous tour in Australia, they sent us to Australia for like nearly 3 months, and they had us penciled in for doing dozens of shows. But when we got there, we realized they weren't selling out, and so lots of shows were cancelled or never advertised. And then we went to America, and again, they had us in America for over 3 months. And I just don't think, you know, people had just lost interest. The hardcore fans were still there, but the floating voters kind of thing had all moved on to hip hop and Nirvana and grunge and everything. So they weren't selling a lot of tickets. So those two tours, they were still massively successful compared to an average band, but they weren't anything like the Brothers in Arms tour. And so I think that disappointed Mark and John. But then when we came back to Europe, the audiences were incredible, and we were playing these huge stadiums, massive fans, like Spain and Italy and Holland and Germany. They were all massive shows, and so that was really great. But it was great to be in Australia and New Zealand, but the American tour was a bit of a grind because we were just playing to 2/3 full arenas sometimes, and it was very hard work, and there wasn't a lot of kind of emotional reward out of it, really.
I was talking to Liberty DeVito a couple of years ago, and he was telling me, I was asking him if the ego, his musical ego, ever gets in the way, and he said that his friends joke that he makes more complicated drum fills when the editor from Modern Drummer is in the crowd. So I was wondering if you ever felt like your ego ever got in the way when playing, that if you know, especially when you were starting out, if you ever felt like you needed to overplay or you know, show off more than the songs needed.
I've always been more about the music. I'm not really, I don't follow drummers per se. I follow the music kind of thing. And when I'm playing in a band, I'm listening to the music, not listening to what I'm doing. But when I was first playing, that was the time of fusion, and so there wasn't really any way that you could overplay. You know, Billy Cobham, Narada Michael Walden, all those people. So actually, when I was at college, I was in a lot of bands doing jazz rock. And then my first professional gig was with a fusion guitarist called Gary Boyle. And Simon Phillips did the drums on his actual records, and I did the shows because we were playing quite small clubs as well. And so, you know, I probably did massively overplay, but it was kind of in the style of the music as well.
Yeah.
But then when I turned fully professional and moved to London, the absolute number one music was like punk and new wave. And so I just realized that people just wanted the drums to be supportive, and they didn't want you to sound too technical. And so if I was ever going to be in a band and ever going to work, I had to be more of a simple drummer. And so and then when I started doing studio work, I played for the song, and I played the simplest parts that I could, and achieve what the producer wanted. And quite often the producer would say, "Oh, we had so and so drummer in on the album a couple of weeks ago, and we couldn't get him to play it so simple. So we hired you, and you're perfect because you play just exactly what we want." And so I got it in my head that that's what people wanted was just the barest drum part that make the song work and leave space for the other people to shine. So that's what I've always done, really. I just play for the song. And I think Andy Newmark or someone I read said, you know, I always start out playing too much and then I listen back and think I can take this out, I could take that out and play the absolute minimum part that still works. And so that's what I used to do when I was doing studio work. The first time you play through the song, you naturally play a bit too much. And then I used to say, can I hear back what I've done? And I'd listen to it. I don't need to do a fill there. I don't need to do a cymbal crash there. And I used to pare it right back to the absolute minimum stuff. And so I actually enjoyed if I could play the least amount of drum fills, the least complicated drums and make the song feel good. That's what I used to enjoy. Not people saying, oh, he's such a great drummer because of this fill. It used to make me laugh if I did like a drum clinic or something, and I'd spend a half an hour talking about a drum groove, and then one of the students would come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, I really like that drum fill," and I'd say, "No, that wasn't the point of the last half hour. The point was the groove." And actually, the only other thing I'd add to that was, obviously, well, people came to the show and I didn't know they were there. So Greg Bisonet came to one of the McCartney shows and I didn't know he was there and I just played my normal way. Jeff Porcaro came to one of the Dire Straits shows and thank God I didn't know he was there because he was one of my heroes and I would have panicked. And then Narada Michael Walden came to one of the McCartney shows and he was standing by the mixing desk by the side of the stage and I just played a terrible show. I was just so nervous. I mean, I wasn't trying to impress him. I was just trying to do a good show, but I had it in my mind that instead of just thinking about the music, I had it in my mind, oh my God, Narada's by the side of the stage. Oh, what am I going to do? And so I didn't play such a great show because he was standing by the side of the stage. But if there's drummers, I know there's going to be drummers when you're playing on a massive tour like that. I know there's going to be good musicians in the audience. And so you just kind of have to put it out of your mind.
So Chris, what are your plans for the future now? You're recording, you're still doing session work, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I really always preferred recording to touring. And because with touring, you're playing the same songs every night for a year or something. And I like the fact of recording, it's more creative because you can change the drums around, you can move the mics about, and you're working on different material all the time. So even all through the 80s and everything, that's what I really enjoyed doing the most was recording rather than playing live. And so I did some live playing in the like from around 2015, and then I just decided I would just concentrate on doing studio stuff. So I've got my home studio here and people can contact me DMs or I'm on soundbetter.com, which is like a music service, and I'll play drums on people's songs. And that's what I really enjoy doing is the creativity of recording drums on people's music. In fact, I did quite a lot of shows in Romania in the
Yeah,
20s with the Dire Straits experience.
yeah, you did. And how did, what's your approach when people send you a song and they say, okay, you write the drum parts. What is your approach to writing a drum part?
Well, I prefer it if they've come up with some ideas. So why I'm not very good at coming up with innovative drum parts myself. And so usually people send me their song and they've done like a programmed drum thing and say, can you do something a bit like this? And I usually take that idea and then make it sound more musical, more professional. And so I usually cue off what people have used. They might use a drum loop or they might use a programmed drum part. And I usually, and sometimes you know, when people are programming drums, they do too many drum fills and they do too many cymbal crashes and the bass drum part too complicated. So I see my role as saying to them, you know, would you mind if I simplified the drums a bit? Can I change the, when you listen to any record, the drums often stay the same throughout the whole song. The bass drum part might slightly change in the chorus, they might go to a ride cymbal in the guitar solo and everything. And so really we've become almost like a loop in drums. And so I try and play the same part through the song. And when people are programming drums, they're changing the drum part every 2 bars. Like there's a different snare drum bit and a different bass drum bit. So I try and get people to simplify things. And mostly it seems to be working. People are very happy with what I've done.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for your time. It
You-
was, it was great to talk to you.
And so you're studying progressive rock.
Yeah, I'm focused on the progressive rock scene of the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah, the drumming aspect of it, you know. I'm actually writing about Phil Collins now and the way
Okay.
he put together his stuff. I don't know if you know,
Yeah.
but if you knew, but Drumeo, they have this whole team of people working from Romania. The whole Drumeo website is run in Romania. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
it's weird. And there's a guy from Italy, but he now lives in Romania who does all the transcriptions, you know, because you can buy sheet music. Yeah, yeah. I didn't know that either.
Oh, it's crazy. No, I didn't know that. And some of the stuff on Dromeo is really good. Like see, like Todd Zuckerman, that's totally the opposite of where I'm coming from, but it's incredible what he does. But I would never record with like 10 toms and 15 cymbals and
Yeah,
but he incredible job. But he's got some great stuff on Dromeo, just talking about how to play for the song, you know, even though he's often playing very complicated parts.
yeah.
But
No,
there was a bit of a crossover between, I mean, I was more the American jazz rock in the 70s, but there was a bit of a crossover between that and progressive. Like did you ever hear that band Nova from Italy?
no,
Parada
I did.
Yeah, they were kind of like a progressive Italian band, but they had Narada Michael Walden on drums and also Rick Parnell played drums with them. It was kind of a cross between Genesis and Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Okay. So what was the name
So
of the
I had
band?
Nova, Nova.
Okay, okay.
They were all Italian apart from the drummer, which they used Narada Michael Walden and they used Rick Parnell. But they came out of the progressive scene, but then ended up being a bit more like jazz rock. And so, and also I used to listen to Brand X and everything,
Yeah,
which was the
yeah.
Phil Collins version of jazz rock. Yeah.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah, interesting.
it's very interesting. It was great to talk to you. I'll send you the link when this is up on YouTube. Um, and it was great to talk to you.
Hey,
And
I hope I didn't fall too much.
no, no, no. And I hope maybe, but you probably thought about it. I think it would be great if you could release a book with all your photographs, well, with some of your photographs.
Yeah, I'm working on it now. I'm planning to do a book of my Dire Straits photographs.
All right,
So
cool.
the book finished in I've got the book finished in demo form, and I actually have to just do some more work on it before I send it to the printers. So maybe the end of the year. And then eventually I've got fewer shots from McCartney because I only started doing the photographs halfway through the tour,
Right.
but there's some good McCartney shots. And so I'd like to do a McCartney book, you know, in a few years' time. But the Dire Straits book, I've more or less finished it. I just have to have it printed, but I'm not going to do, it's mostly photographs. And I do like a paragraph about each part of the tour, each leg of the tour,
Mm-hmm.
which helps to explain some of the photographs. But I'm not doing like a autobiography expose about what the tour was like, and I'm not going to write a book about the actual tour. It's more the photographs with a bit of explanation about what was going on in the band in those photographs.
Well, I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll keep in touch. I'll send you the link once this is up.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Chris. Bye bye. Have a great day.
Same to you.